Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this WISE debate, Education and Community, Fostering Local Development. I'm Frida Wolfenden and I'll be moderating the discussion here this afternoon. So I'm currently an academic at the Open University in the UK in the Education faculty where I work on education and development. And for several years now I've been directing the TESA project, Teacher Education in Sub-Saharan Africa. That was one of the WISE award winners last year. After we've had some introductions, we're going to engage in a panel discussion for about 45 minutes. Like all the discussions at WISE, a key theme this afternoon is innovation. All our panellists are innovators from different contexts and education sectors. We hope to hear about what's inspired them in their work, the thinkers, the ideas that drive their creativity, the models they use, who they work with when planning how to turn those ideas into practical reality, and the lessons that they've learnt through their initiatives that can be transferred to other contexts and challenges. So, to our discussion, education and community, fostering local development. I'm sure would all support the idea that education is a concern for the whole community. Civic leaders, employers, parents. It isn't something that is only relevant to young children or adolescents. It isn't something that only takes place within the confines of the kindergarten playground, school building, or college campus. For communities to fully develop their potential, we need the community to be comprised of educated citizens with skills to participate in the global economy, for education to support improvements in health, safety, and economic security. But how do we encourage all the stakeholders in a community to work together to develop such a collective vision? How do we shift existing systems, notoriously hard to move? Where do we start? In my own work with TESA, we've been very heavily influenced by the work of someone called Richard Elmore and his ideas of backward mapping. His idea is that intervention should start at the point of maximum impact. His approach questions the assumption that policymakers have the determining influence on the implementation process. Instead, his approach attempts to isolate the critical point in a complex educational organisation system or structure that's closest to the problem. Starting here, we then work backwards towards, at each point, describing specific behaviours which need to happen at that point to move towards solution of the problem. Our assumption is that successful problem solving in complex systems is directly linked to the ability to exert leverage at the point where the problem is most immediate. So for us in TESA, we have started with classrooms where teachers are working with children, not with policymakers. But that's only one approach, and I hope this afternoon you're going to hear about the approach from other projects that our panellists have been leading. Then how do we judge the success of their different initiatives? Do we need new metrics rather than just measures of literacy levels and credits gained? Do we need additional resources to reach all members of the community, including the poorest and the most marginalised? Or can we draw on resources from within those communities, nurturing local leaders and building on past experiences? These are some of the questions that we're going to be exploring over the next hour through the experiences and analysis of our panellists. So now it's time to introduce our panellists. I'd like them just to introduce themselves to you, telling you where they're from and their experience which has brought them to this discussion this afternoon. So, Abner.
I'm Abner September. I'm a sociologist. I come from Haiti, and I'm the founding member of an association called Association of Farmers that dates back to 25 years. And we will be able to share this experience of the Association of Townspeople of Value.
Thank you. Natasha?
I am Natasha. I like to speak Portuguese, but I can't. So I'll try to speak English. I'm from São Paulo, Brazil. I'm the executive director of an NGO called Apprentice City School. We were created in 1997, and we started working in a little community, in a community of São Paulo called Vila Madalena, and from that we developed a social technology called Learning Neighborhood that has been spread all over Brazil. That's about it. I'm going to bring you some ideas.
Great, thank you. Farouk?
Good afternoon. I'm Farouk Birni. I am the director of Al Fakhura, which is an advocacy campaign based in Qatar. It's an international advocacy campaign that advocates for the protection of education and access to education in Gaza, Palestine, which is currently under blockade.
Thank you. Finally, Rod.
Good afternoon, and I'd like to speak many languages, but I'm going to stick with English because it's the only one I actually can speak. My name is Rod Allen. I'm the Superintendent of Learning for the Ministry of Education in British Columbia, a province on the west coast of Canada. And we're involved in a fairly comprehensive transformation of education in British Columbia and trying to do things quite differently than has been done before. So we've done a lot of thinking and work in this area of trying to get decisions placed at the right place in the organization, in the system, so that they can have the greatest chance of coming to fruition.
Great, thank you. I'd like to start the discussion this afternoon by thinking about collaborations. Who are our collaborators? How do we engage them? How do we harness efforts for a shared purpose? And maybe how do we sustain those collaborations? So, Natasha, maybe thinking about your experience with the Apprentice City School and its actions with communities in many different areas across Brazil, how do you start working with a particular community? What's their motivation for working with you?
Actually, what we see is that a community can only be engaged by something that that is meaningful for them. And I think that education is a very engaging agenda because people understand that through education there can be more awareness about every other rights they have. So this is something that engage people when they see that they can understand better their reality and that they can face the challenges by understanding this reality and getting common strategies to face the challenges. There's a African saying, at least that's what I heard, that says, it takes a village to raise a child. Is that African? Yes. This is very important for us because that's the other point that is very engaging to the communities, taking care of their own children. When we talk about learning neighborhood and we say that creating conditions, good conditions for their development of their children and their teenagers, people want that. People want to think about that. And that is from this idea that we start. And we start with the people that want to be part of it. Not everybody wants in the first beginning. Most of the time, more people get involved through the time, but sometimes we start with 2 or 3 teachers, 1 or 2 parents, and then it becomes a wave, and everybody comes with us. That's something like this.
Great, thank you. Apni, perhaps you could extend that to think about how you work with community youth leaders in your projects in Haiti.
Well, first of all, we involve at the level of the communities, but also work with other partners and institutions, be it public or private. Now, we start from something very simple. We say that it is the people and their companies that will make the difference between the territories. And so we see the persons guided by the light of their community, guided by the collective awareness. That is what we call the engagement, civic engagement, and the citizens' engagement to do together. to endeavor together. And it's not it's through the light of education that we will start to exchange, have an exchange. And in our case, we have first worked with community leaders, and in turn, they were to work with their communities. Now, this is a top-to-bottom and bottom-to-top approach, which means it goes both ways. So we discuss, we reflect together, and there must be a leading thread, if you like. We must have a common understanding and common reflection to be able to do so. But at the same time, you have to create the confidence, because we don't know each other to start with. And so you have to find that common ground in order to create a climate of confidence, a climate where you listen to each other. So our basic approach was that. But for our hosts, it was important for them to give back to the community what they had learned, because we benefited from an education, and we believe, we consider ourselves as being privileged. So our mission was to go back to the village, go back to the community in order to work with the people.
Thank you. I really like what you were just saying there about it being a kind of combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches. And I wonder perhaps then if we could just bring in Rod and your experience there of perhaps working more within a system in British Columbia, and how you kind of involve people who aren't necessarily the policymakers in the change that you're enacting.
Sure. I mean, I think even working within a system, the players are all the same, but you might have different relationships with them. So we have a fairly standard system in British Columbia. In the past, education decisions have seemed to be the sole proviso of government. However, that's often left students out of the equation, parents, communities, etc. And so they've felt more done to than done with. And we're trying to flip that upside down this time and view the role of government really as an enabling one as opposed to a prescriptive one. So government can enable change, government can enable transformation, but they can't prescribe it, they can't mandate it. So we're using a term in British Columbia a lot called social license, not a new idea, but trying to establish the idea, excuse me, of social license. So government acts not because they have the right to do so necessarily, but because their policies reflect what people want. So we've spent a long time gathering that social license from people, students, parents, families, community, business, teachers, to give us sort of the moral authority to go ahead and move in some of these enabling policies, like curriculum reform, like assessment reform, and so on. So it sort of flips it. So we're doing the working at the will of, or on behalf of, members of the community education community, as opposed to having them work for us. So it's kind of a flip.
Can I just ask you there, in that process, whether people were very keen to come forward and engage in that process? Because sometimes you do hear stories that you want to go out to consultation, you want to listen to the student's voice, and maybe the students aren't always that keen to participate.
Yeah,
what was your experience?
That's a good point. Initially, we had to build a lot of trust. So we had to really go out and ensure people that we wanted to try to do things in a different way. And that meant that it wasn't just talking about it, it was doing it. So, for example, we don't use the word consultation much anymore. Consultation has a sense, in my mind anyway, that it's something you do after you're pretty much ready to do something. And we'll just check at the end to make sure that everybody is okay with that. We're using the term co-construction, where we begin from the very beginning. We include those voices and those ideas at the very beginning of the process, not on a consultative process after. And so it took a while, probably a year, for us to continually demonstrate that we could be trusted to do a co-construction process and to actually sort of walk the talk, as opposed to just saying, well, this is a fancier form of consultation. So it was difficult. It was also difficult, I think, for some of the groups, students especially, to feel that we weren't just listening to them, we were including them in the process, which is different than hearing but not acting on. So we really had to demonstrate that we are acting on what we heard and use generative processes, generative iterative planning processes, as opposed to a longer-term strategic plan, which more formally we might have done, because that just doesn't work.
Yeah, maybe I could bring in Farouk here with your experiences in Gaza, because I know that you undertook some kind of analysis, some sort of research before you started to identify perhaps groups and areas where you might work. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that process.
Sure. Our process actually, our initiative started in 2008, 2009, which was around the time that Gaza was attacked by Israel. And prior to that, Gaza had been under blockade, which means that in our context, what we wanted to do is develop a program that helps young people pursue education and to be able to protect educational institutes, which were many times a target of these attacks. So when this initiative was launched, we really wanted to develop a program which purely addresses the needs of these young people. And the situation that we were faced with was quite unique, because Gaza has a population which is 40% of its population is below the age of 25. So it's a vast population that is young. Students that we had encountered, they were very ambitious. They wanted to pursue their academic dreams. They wanted to pursue various kinds of programs, educational programs and development programs, but it was the issue of access. So one of the core programs for us that was important was to develop a scholarship program, because also, given the ongoing blockade situation, people are suffering economically. So many of the students that we had taken on board are people or young people from very deprived families. So we needed to build a program that not only addresses their educational needs, but also addresses their economic needs of their families, because to many of these people, education is a luxury. So the kind of partnership or the program that we established was in a way looking after their educational needs, but also looking after their financial needs. So, the program that we embarked upon was that the partner that we brought on board, they were going to develop businesses for these families, whereby through our program, it was about providing them scholarships. But again, this was a situation that was very unique, given the situation, the political situation. So our consultation process involved working with these young people, working with these families, and really trying to identify the gaps, that where are the gaps? Because again, in Gaza, Palestine, given the situation and the occupation, that there are many organizations already working there within the areas of education and health. So our core focus has been to identify gaps, developing these programs to help young people, and empowering them to also run these programs and be in a situation or a position where they feel ownership, and they're also part of the decision-making process. So this has helped us a lot in developing what we wanted to develop: A, education; B, economic development; and C, health. So these have been three core issues for us.
So could I just ask you what your kind of vision is, aspiration is for that program as it moves forward? Because you've talked about scholarships. Are you still giving out scholarships, or have you sort of reached a finite number of scholarships and businesses that you're supporting? What's the kind of roadmap forward?
So as I said earlier, when I started that, it's an advocacy initiative, which basically means that advocating, A, for the lifting of the blockade; B, for these young people to have access to education and protection. So the scholarship program is basically, we give out 100 scholarships annually for higher education in Gaza. Along with our scholarship program, we have a complete training program that looks into developing leaders from the communities, which focuses on mentoring programs, focuses on media training. It focuses on, programs that are really related to advocacy and for young Palestinians to help them develop a narrative. And this focus is being primarily towards a Western audience, that these young people, should be able to speak to the West and try to present their case, of their situation. But also, what makes us unique is not just this abstract advocacy concept, but the programs that we have on the ground. So ultimately, what we're doing is, so far we have 400 students within the program. I mean, starting with this year, we'll have 400 students, meaning 400 scholarships, 400 businesses. And along with that, we have different programs that helps their families. We have psychosocial program, and also helping to rebuild the infrastructure, the educational infrastructure in Gaza, working with educational institutes in training programs, development, and also to a certain degree reconstruction of educational institutes. So it's a kind of a holistic program that looks at, as I said earlier, education, economic empowerment, and building leaders from within the community.
Sure, thank you. I think there are lots of similarities there with your program in Haiti, where again you're kind of working to establish businesses, aren't you? I just wanted to ask you about how you draw in local existing businesses then. Do people see what you're doing as a threat, or is this an opportunity? Are you training their workers of the future, or how is it perceived by businesses?
Bon, enfin, ce que nous faisons, c'est
What we do
ce qu'on appelle la création
is
de la valeur,
what we call value creation, the creation of value and transformation of
et cela
value.
signifie que
This means
en
that
travaillant avec
by
les
working
gens,
with people,
nous essayons de comprendre
we try to
la réalité,
understand the
les valeurs
realities,
locales,
the local
et
values,
intégrer
and
ces valeurs-là
integrate
dans la
these
dynamique.
values in the
Parce qu'il y a tout un
dynamic.
modèle
Because
traditionnel
there's a
qui
whole
existe, par
traditional
exemple,
model that
comment
exists.
travailler
For
ensemble.
example, how to
Donc,
work together.
c'est un système qui
This is a system that's called
compétisme,
competisme, which is sharing, mutual help. So we first invest in people.
Donc, nous faisons des
We
rencontres et nous essayons
meet
d'intégrer
people and we
tout le
try
monde.
to
C'est pas
integrate
une catégorie,
everybody. It's not
mais
just
nous
one
intégrons tout le monde.
category, but we integrate
Et nous
everybody.
négocions nos
And
rapports
we
avec
negotiate
d'autres institutions, que
our
ce soit au niveau
relationships with
local
other institutions, be it
et dans les
local,
communautés.
in
Sur
the
le plan public, il y
communities,
a un institut qui
at the
s'appelle
public level, there's
CASEC.
an
Nous
institute
essayons
called
d'intégrer
CASEC. And so we try to
ces
integrate
autorités publiques,
the public
surtout en
authorities as
matière
well,
d'environnement, parce que
especially in
nous,
the
en
field
tant
of
qu'autorité
environment,
civile,
because as a
nous
civil
pouvons effectivement
authority
réfléchir avec la
organization, we
communauté.
can
Nous pouvons
reflect
mettre
with
en
the
place
community, we
ensemble
can
des
together
règlements,
put in
mais il
place
faut que l'État
regulations,
s'implique
but the
aussi.
state
Et
must
nous, nous ne
also
sommes
be
pas l'État.
involved, and we are
À ce
not the
moment-là, nous
state.
cherchons, nous
So
cultivons
we
une proximité
cultivate
avec
that
les autorités
closness
publiques,
with the
tant
public
au niveau
authorities
local, tant au niveau
locally,
communal
but
qu'au
also
niveau
the
central.
commune level
Donc, à ce
and the
moment-là,
central
nous
level.
ne sommes pas perçus
So we are not
comme
then
une
perceived
menace,
as a
comme un
threat
ennemi.
or as
Au
an
contraire,
enemy. To the
nous
contrary,
avons eu une
we
distinction
have been
Naturellement, nous sommes là
distinguished
pour
by the
porter
state, because after all we are
les
there
revendications,
to
des populations,
satisfy
pour
the
faire
needs
de
of
la
the
pression sur les
populations,
structures, parce que
to put
nous payons aussi
pressure
des taxes, et
on
malheureusement,
the
les services ne
institute.
sont pas toujours
We
là.
pay taxes
Donc,
and the
nous allons
services aren't
faire un
always
peu de
available.
pression
So we
pour
put some
porter
pressure
l'État ou les
so
responsables
that
à prendre
the
leurs responsabilités. Dans ce sens-là, nous
political
ne sommes
system
pas
actually
avant tout-
takes
nous
their
ne sommes pas un
responsibilities.
parti politique,
We're not a
mais
political
nous avons des
party,
revendications
but
sociales.
we have
Et c'est
social
pourquoi au
demands,
niveau local,
and that
nous
is why at the
essayons
local
aussi
level we
d'élargir,
also try to
cette,
widen
dynamique
this
à toutes les organisations. Nous
dynamic
avons
to other
différents espaces de
organizations.
participation,
We've got different
et
areas
cela
of participation,
implique même
and
non
this
seulement des gens
involves not
des
only the
organisations de la région,
people
mais aussi
from
au niveau
organizations
national.
of the
Par
region,
exemple,
but
il y a ce
also
qu'on appelle la force
nationally.
de la montagne, qui
We
adresse à la fois
have
la problématique
issue where we
rural
deal
en
with the
Haïti, mais
rural
également la problématique
problems,
de
but
la montagne plus
also the
particulièrement.
mountain
Voyez?
as
Parce
well,
que nous sommes une
because
réalité de montagne à 75%, et on
75%
dirait que les gens ne
is
prennent pas
mountainous,
conscience
but people
effectivement
don't
que
seem
nous
to
sommes dans un
necessarily
pays de
gain
montagne, mais en même
awareness that
temps
we are a
que ces
mountainous
montagnes sont
country,
dégradées.
and that the
Donc, à
mountains
l'occasion, d'un
have
côté,
also
nous invitons
suffer
d'autres
from an
organisations
environmental point of view.
à la-
So
et,
we
à l'échelle
invite
nationale,
other
mais là,
organizations
ces
at the
organisations
national scale. If we don't have a direct relationship with them, we go through institutions that actually work with these organizations. So it allows us to have an exchange. It allows to creating that dynamic, which, be it the farm organizations, the state or development cooperation organizations, all to work together, including the companies, of course, because when we produce, we sell. We have to go and sell, and then we also buy. There are products that we don't manufacture, so necessarily you have to cultivate this partnership with the different stakeholders.
Great. And so then I just wanted to follow that up with saying you've talked about you go towards the national bodies, to other corporations and so on. So if somebody here was talking about working in a similar type project, what kind of messages do you take to national level? What kind of messages might be transferable to another context?
What you do is structures, and it's useful and concerns other organizations in their space. You have to have something to put in the basket, as it were, of discussion, isn't it? But something that actually works. So we also try to integrate ourselves in networks. For example, you have networks on the processing of agricultural produce, or networks concerning the integration, social integration, or right to housing and land. So we try to integrate these different networks, to work together, to understand together. Even within our space, the organization is to get the different organizational entities that share geographical closeness, to get them to work together. The message is alone you're weak, isn't it? But when you stand together, then you become stronger. And when you say you become stronger, that means that you can actually reflect together, you can identify things together, and you can go more in depth. And you can also put pressure on others and show that you exist. So we become a force to be contended with. And in our dynamic, that is a very important objective, to go towards the others and see to what extent we can actually share something, a collective idea, but also, be strong, assertive. There are a lot of farmer organizations, but the area of exchange is very weak. So then we, in our different areas, in our different spaces and relations, we try to motivate, sensitize people to this objective.
Thank you. Maybe we could add a little bit here from Natasha's experience in Brazil. I know that you too have been engaging with policymakers because your project, your activities have now spread to a large number of urban, maybe rural as well, areas in Brazil. Perhaps you could tell us a bit, maybe in the challenges of talking to policymakers.
When we talk when we think about a policy that can hold this idea of learning neighborhood, we are saying that education goes beyond schools. Schools are part of the educational process. People get educated everywhere, with every people, all lifelong. So what we try to do is to identify the educative assets of the cities and from the communities that can help kids learn, can help kids get developed. And this idea is dialoguing well with the integral education programs in Brazil, where we are starting to make schools in Brazil, public schools in Brazil are often 4 hours per day of classes. And now we are struggling to have at least 7 hours per day of classing. What we are trying to do, Aprendiz, is to discuss that it's not about having more of the same. If we want to have more education, and there's a program in Brazil called More Education, we should have more meaningful education. We should get different agents, different spaces, different languages introduced in the school space, and getting the schools connected to other places and spaces that could be educative to the kids. So the idea of more education is the idea of transforming the model, transforming because schools and now in this technology area has not the monopoly of the knowledge anymore. Knowledge is not at school only. Some time ago, we had to go to school to get information, to understand what people were discussing. Now people get information everywhere. So the schools are more like facilitators of this development process. They have to be connected to the things that are meaningful to the communities where they are based on, to help systematize what these people are discussing, what the kids are interested about. Because that's the new role of school. Because we have to learn how to build knowledge, how to learn, and not get information. This is very important nowadays. And so in Brazil, that's what we are trying. This policy, more education, is now in 32,000 schools all over Brazil. Brazil is a continental country. I don't know if you realize that. So everything is like thousands and thousands and thousands. If you talk in Rio, we have 1,000 schools, right? In Rio. So it's always like that in Brazil. We're always talking about huge numbers. But now this idea of learning neighborhood, of connecting schools with the communities and getting new agents, new opportunities is in 32,000 schools in Brazil. And in each community, in each city, in each state is a different way of doing it. This is the important thing. That's not something, and I think Rod has a great experience of that, is not something prescriptive. It's not something that you can say, do like this, follow this curriculum, follow on the same day you have to be, on 10th of January you have to be learning this, because that's not how things work. That's not how teaching and learning goes. So the idea is to give a guideline, to give guidelines, to give some ideas, but the communities and the schools have to be organized on themes, on projects that make sense for them. So that's what we're trying to do and to manage with the public policies in Brazil, and it's working. It's fine.
One of the things in British Columbia that we're trying to do is because we have the same issue that Natasha just identified, really, which is how do we allow students to come to the center of their learning and to own their own learning? You have to give them some space and some time to do that. So one of the things we're doing is opening up our curriculum to have fewer learning outcomes and allow more white space in there for teachers and students to really go into depth about understanding. Because then local communities, that's a space where local communities can engage with their own young people and the teachers in their schools to really focus on their needs, find time and space in there as well. And that's sometimes a bit terrifying for folks to do that, to say, we're not the experts, you're the experts, you need to take charge of this. And so by making policies more enabling, communities are able to move into that space as they feel able to do so, which I think is important, because they need the confidence to be able to go in there and feel that they're having positive effect on their kids. Because, as Natasha was saying, the idea that just more is something that we have to overcome. We want different, otherwise we're going to have the same outcomes that we currently have. So we want something quite different. And there's a great quote by Henry Ford that I like, the old car maker, who said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So there's some need to also educate and give the communities time to feel their way through this, and so that they can really start to assert their voice. And the same with students. if you just come out cold and ask students what they want, often that's a fairly low-level answer that you get. So you need to work with them over time to help them feel confident to really make good decisions about their learning. Same with the community. So it's around enabling that to happen as opposed to prescribing that to happen.
There's an idea that I like is that education is not a preparation for life. We usually work with that. I don't know if in your countries it's like this. We just listen to that all the time in Brazil. We're getting the kids prepared for life. What we don't notice, and maybe in community-based we notice, is that they are living already. They are alive. They have ideas, they have background, they have social networks, they have interests, and they have knowledge. Kids have knowledge, they are competent, they can do things. And working with this idea of preparation for life, we just work with them like they were rats in a lab. And that's not what happens. And when you bring, and what we have in Brazil is sometimes the teachers go to a school, many times they go to a school and they have no idea what is going on in that community. They have no idea what is the life of those kids. So they cannot connect to those kids because they have no idea. We have some programs in Brazil where I make the teachers go to the kids' house, and most of them come back to school and said, I had no idea they lived like that. I used to say, wow, you didn't study, you didn't, and then I saw they don't have space for that because they live, they sleep, they watch TV in the same room. So this idea of getting connected, of knowing them, of knowing who are these kids, and making their possibilities, opportunities be wider than they could see, it's our role. So this is very important. They are there already, and they are ready to be part of this learning process and not only be a blank spreadsheet that we just write down.
No, I think that's a very, very powerful message, actually, to come out of this, that we need to be understanding very deep, at a deep level, the communities that we're working with. Farouk, would you like
I think another very important thing to touch upon, it was discussed earlier today in some of the sessions, is education which is relevant to the communities in which these students live, which kind of takes us to this aspect of market demand. And this has been, I mean, we've seen this happening in various communities, that you have students who are educated, but they're not able to get the right kind of jobs. So, in some of the approaches that we've adopted is initially, even before we embarked on the scholarship program, we initiated a market assessment or a market survey, that what would the market be like 5 to 10 years from now? Because what you don't want is you have these students graduating and they really don't have, proper employment. So that has also, in terms of research, in terms of assessment, it's also very important. And then from the findings that you get is working with the institutions to also help them understand and really come out of the box. This is what it's going to be like 5 to 10 years from now. And in our case, what we discovered was there was a great need for vocational training. But when you look at society, vocational training many times is kind of looked down upon. And so if you couldn't really get into a good university or a college, you would go the vocational route. That perception also needs to be changed, and that is actually happening with time. And it's a parallel mechanism by which you have to work. For example, with the Ministry of Labor, you have to work with the Ministry of Education, and also the private sector, to really scale up some of the services and the kind of services or education that is being provided. So these are some of the real issues, for example, in our case, that we're facing. And another thing which is quite unique is in a place like Gaza, where you have an economy, you have opportunities, but there's a cap. Because in other places, you say, if you educate people and if you provide them the right skills, they'll be able to use that within the community. But in the context of Gaza and Palestine, you know, education is one tool, which is, I mean, you know, there's a lot of educated people in Palestine and even some of the skills that they have, but also for them to be able to apply those skills within their community is a big challenge because, as I said earlier, because of the blockade. So one of the things that we're looking on in terms of employment, there's two areas. One is kind of your conventional businesses, you know, that are already flourishing and you know, families and even young students, you know, they're developing those businesses. But we're also looking right now at virtual work, that how could these students, once they graduate, work virtually? So, you know, which is helping us to interface with educational institutes, the private sector, and really, you know, providing these young students with the skills that would enable them to market themselves. So these are all very real life kind of challenges that are being faced. And what we feel is the model that we are working to develop in collaboration, you know, with our beneficiaries can be replicated in other places. You know, somebody might say, well, the situation in Gaza or Palestine is different and unique. It is, but really when it goes back to empowering your beneficiaries in its true essence, it really makes a lot of difference. And you're able to see some unique ideas come forward and you know, the beneficiaries themselves are able to implement those.
Thank you. Abner, would you like to join?
Oui, oui, je voulais ajouter.
I'd like to add one thing. In our case, we followed quite a rich and diversified path. It was based on those 5 impact pillars. First, transforming mentalities. Second, transforming infrastructures, better orienting material interests, and harmonizing our relationship to nature, and strengthening the social fabric. And based on all this, we asked the following question to the farmers on a regular basis. What action items are most important to you? And from the education point of view. And the first answer was literacy. And then, based on all this, we founded our first group. So it was about having more dignity, but it was also about organizing things. Then we had a look at what people, how people saw education, and those farmers told us that our children are what is going to make us rich, but it's about a quantity. You know, we need a lot of people to farm those lands. And then we thought, okay, those children are important, but you need educated children. And this is how we launched this entire work about finding the right school together with the farmers. What kind of school for which community? What kind of school for the future of that community? And we made some choices. But obviously we're in a mountainous region, as I said, and very often the schools are very far away from the homes of the children, and the children couldn't get there early in the morning, so schools had to be closer to the children's homes. And if it's, is it going to be a 2-tier school or a 3-tier school? And in our case, we said, we have to open the best facilities so that our children get the best school possible, and even if they live in a rural and remote area. So we work together with the local community. We work with some partners to train the teachers, to find the necessary means to build those schools. That's what we did. But what is really fundamental is that we tried to replicate all this in all our activities, because we work in about 10 sectors, different sectors. So about transforming the agri-food sector. It's about transforming the produce, but also it's also about improving the environment. We need to provide quality produce. We need also also to improve environment. It's about living together also. So we need to learn how to work together. We need to educate people in the broader sense of the word. So what we told to the farmers that, yes, we could do very good things indeed. So those are some of the choices we made, be it with transforming the produce, be it working with the environment. And those choices, those decisions have allowed us to build a relationship with other organizations who would like to do the same.
Great, thank you. I think just before we move to questions from the audience, I'm just going to ask one more question from the to the panel. We've all talked very eloquently about consultation, about getting to know the communities that you're working in, and hopefully one feels that you're part of those communities as well. But those things all take time. And sometimes the sponsors of our programs, the funders, or whether they're the governments or the policyholders, they're quite anxious to see action, particularly if they're politicians. They may have elections coming up and so on. So I think it's quite, from my experience, it's quite difficult to persuade people to give you that time. So listening to you all, it all sounds very simple, but I think the reality probably isn't that simple. So I just wondered if you could perhaps just give kind of a very short little snippet on any advice for people, how you've managed to persuade people to give you that time, or what a big challenge has been in that. So I don't mind. Who would like to start?
Sure,
Rod,
I'll take a go. Again, coming back to the concept of social license, I think has been really key for us. So that the set of ideas that we've been working throughout the province with really transcend government. And so I talk about, because I work for government, how government is responding to those commonly held set of ideas that are guiding or underpinning our transformation in British Columbia. So we keep those ideas up high, and that's the social license that we have to do the work underneath. So a change in government might mean something would get repackaged, the flavors would change slightly, but the social license that the movement has built is really important. So we're using ideas, instead of ideas like implementation models, we're talking about affiliation models, how it is that people can affiliate to those larger ideas which transcend politics. And so it would be very difficult then for politicians to come in an election change or whenever and change those ideas, because really the people have spoken, and as they affiliate to those larger ideas, that becomes our social license.
I think one of the approaches that we take, and we've been quite successful at that, is integrating all the key partners. Right. There's once we've agreed on, this is the project that we're working on, then we're all partners to it, whether that be the beneficiaries, the implementers, or the donors. So all expectations are clearly laid out. So the pressures are there, but everyone has a stake in what you're doing or what we're doing. So everybody is managing their part, and that has been very successful, where things are lined up and we're in this together. That has been a successful approach for us.
Thank you.
We like to say a joke that education is not a cookie. You cannot put like in 5 minutes and bake it and it's ready. It's a complex issue. It's something that's not easy to think. So we cannot give simple answers to that. From that, what we have done to persuade people having patience about that is that trying to understand the process and see what can we get in 1 year long, what can we get in 4 years long, and what can we get in 10 years long, and to see it as a process. From our experimentation, we try to organize that. What are the goals and what can we get from in this period, so people can see things happening in a process that takes time, but they can see things being advancing. And this is very important to bring to the community some visual marks of that. Communication is very important in this empowering process, and it is politically very important as well. I wish I could show you some pictures, but you can see in our website of how we made communitarian interventions in the communities. We made up some murals, we made up some squares with the community so people could see in the space, in the public space, things going on. Because this social capital process can be very silent. It can be very sometimes you don't see it happening. I remember a teacher that went to Aprendiz once and she said, "What is learning neighborhood?" I went here, I thought I could see that. No, you can't. It's relationships that are here. You can't see the network. But sometimes make it visible is very important. So these are some of the strategies that we've been developing.
Very helpful. And just final word, we could just very quickly, before we move to questions.
In our case, this is part of the system of resources, and we have 5 ways of mobilizing the resources. First of all, we count on the communities with which we work and in different ways. And then I can emphasize the capitalization. We have experiences, we also have skills, competencies, and we go towards institutions to propose services. Third way is mobilizing the volunteers, the friends or students or trainees, and that helps in doing things. And fourth way would be activities that generate income. For example, we have a project, it's over, and then we assess whether we can continue or not. In the case of processing of agricultural produce, we finish the project phase, then we do an evaluation, and then we found that we must continue. And then we have, this was a transformation, then we transformed it into a cooperative project, and so it sells its produce in the capital. And then, lastly, the funders. Now, this isn't very easy because we had to use several strategies. It's really a combination. Firstly, you have to have bearer of a good idea and clarify your idea in the form of a project, and then have the information, the data, but also to be able to defend your ideas. And this is something that is done to start with. Sometimes you go and meet the institution and says, well, this is what you do, this is how you work, and that you would like their support. So that's the first contact that's established. So the institution says, okay, we will see the community, but when they get there, what you said is what the community itself is going to express in their own way. And thereby there is a communication established between those in charge and the grassroots, and so you're convincing. But one of the fundamental elements is to have this capacity to deliver. And when you can actually manage well your activities and people see that you are a credible partner, then it is much easier for you to mobilize people and funds. But if the funder saying, have you used the money well? Is the result, has the result been met? Have you done what you need to do in good time? I think that's not enough. I think you have to go further. Is there a social impact? Is there an environmental impact? Did it contribute to strengthening the community? These elements are just as important as the others that I mentioned.
Yes. Perhaps we'll have time to talk a little bit about impact in a few minutes, but I'd like to open it up now to questions from the audience. I have 1 or 2 questions here that have come through to me, but this is your chance to contribute to the discussions. So.
Thank you. I'm Ehsan Rahman from Bangladesh, working with Taka Asenia Mission. It's an organization working at the community level as well as working at the macro level with the government. My question would go to the panelists from who are sharing experience on Gaza. Question comes from my understanding that when you talk about local development, the community voice is the first requirement, and their choice should be there because they are in the best position to decide. And what the development programs comes from government, from other organization, this doesn't come simultaneously, so that it can be packed. So the programs need to be adapted based on what the current state of development is there. In most cases, what happens, the package goes and it goes on its own, and there is very little collaboration among them. When you was talking about collaboration and packaging, starting together and managing it, I'm getting difficulty in understanding that from my experience at the community level, because this doesn't really work at that level. So what we found that the community, if the community is given a space to interact, to argue, and to question, as well as to help the development actors to adapt, then it works. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think in a way you've answered the question as well, that I think what is really important is to have an honest debate with all your stakeholders. And that process needs to start from the very beginning, not when the project is at its final stage and we make it as something which is very artificial, that kind of, okay, by the way, let's include the beneficiaries of the partners. So that goodwill has to initiate from the very beginning. And once you have that approach, then I think all partners, if you're in charge as a donor, they see that are you really trying to make that effort? And if they see that, then the process becomes easy.
Fani de Toy, I'm from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in South Africa. We do community work and education work as well. Question just, it may be a little bit more philosophical, but short. And this is, isn't community and education a bit at odds with one another? If I look at these four case studies, they're all about deprived communities, or communities that are sometimes communities against their own will, boxed in the case of Gaza, for example, against their will. What happens if people are educated in those communities? Don't they feel they want to leave the community? Don't they feel that they want to be emancipated and join the rest of us in the international community and so on? Isn't there a tension between what one tries to do at a community level and the education process? And how do you think about that tension?
We are really a system of privilege in British Columbia. So really, but we wrestle with similar issues. We just I think solutions look probably a bit different. But I think a role of education is, as you've identified, it is to create a sense of perhaps unrest or restlessness, wanting something better, and trying to have the youth voice take us someplace different than we are, no matter where we are in the world. We want something better for our futures. So I think we want that restlessness, and communities can help provide that, but with a sense of grounding as well, that it's not all about taking what you've learned and going somewhere else. It's trying to drive improvements in your own local communities as well, local and global.
Really like to answer that, because there's an experience in Heliópolis. Heliópolis it was considered the second biggest slum in São Paulo and even Brazil, I think. And they developed this learning neighborhood. They are the best example. And it's so the opposite of what you said, because what I think is the old way of thinking about education is, I'm getting to the school so I can get a certificate that will make me different from you. So I'll be here and you won't, because you're not educated, you see? This is what we want to. education in this case is not to make people different from each other, better than each other. It's to give people the key, I forgot the word. It's not Portuguese. To give them the ways, the tools to make their own life better. And when they understand that, when they understand that education is something that make them more aware of their rights and make them understand more what they have, they want to change their reality, because that's the value of education. Education is not to make people feel better than the others. That's what we've been doing. We shouldn't. So Heliópolis now is working as a learning neighborhood where everybody learns with everybody, where everybody is worried about the kids' development, the children's development, but not because they are the future, because they are now there. And because a better city and a better neighborhood for the children is a better neighborhood for everybody. So a good city for children, a safe city for children, is a safe city for everybody. That's why children and education takes us to a next step in our discussion. So no, people don't want to live. They just want to live when the better, the best, it's us outside, and it's never outside. It's never outside. It's always where we belong, but we have to feel that we belong. That's education. That's an education role, I think, to feel that we belong somewhere.
Thank you. I am Dr. Ali from Pakistan, professor of education. My question, there are two questions. One is for Mr. Bernie. What are the outcomes and impact of the Al-Fakhura advocacy initiatives? The second question for the panelists, in the real life, that what we see, that our society is heterogeneous in nature. We have people from diverse culture. They have different ideologies, priorities, economic background, and religion. In this context, how to involve, how to bring a society, keeping the balance as well, and with a focus of minorities as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Farouk, would you like to take that first, about the impacts of your work?
Sure. So I'll give you one example. One of the key programs that we're running, it's one of our flagship projects. It's called Virtual Majlis. And what we do through this program is we connect some of our students from Gaza to other students in the US at one of the universities there. And initially when we started this program 2 years ago, and we introduced these students first time from Gaza to the US, there were so many misconceptions, on both sides, that, from the side of Gaza, as how, people are perceived in the West, and from the West, how these students are perceived, or people generally that are perceived in the Middle East. And through this progression, of these sessions, which we do every week, we've seen the perceptions that have changed. And it's unbelievable that, with time you see at the end of the day that as young people, they all have pretty much the same dreams and aspirations to pursue, a better life, to live in peace, to live in harmony. And you see that transition, and it's really amazing to see. It's really, it's very fulfilling to see that how these perceptions have changed. So, that's one of the initiatives which we feel has been very successful, and we're expanding this program to institutes in the UK and other parts of North America as well. And then also from our economic development program, the families of these students that we work with. And as I mentioned earlier, that with 100 scholarship comes 100 new initiatives, business initiatives. So we've also seen the families, that have changed. One of our students, her family, when she came on board, she had a shop, and a tailoring shop where she used to stitch dresses. They were making $200 a month, and now their income is about $700 a month, with certain skills that we've taught them about business, how to run a business properly, and to also encourage them to also expand the kind of people they work with, and just, very small, adjustments. You can see that, how big of a difference it makes. And then also at a political level, when we talk about the blockade, there are initiatives that are in place that is also changing, perception. So, these are some of the examples which we feel have been, very useful.
Thank you. And I think actually in part of your answer, you really answered the second part of the question about we may be a very heterogeneous society, but once we kind of can get through those misconceptions and we can really start talking to each other, then we discover that we do all have the same shared dreams and aspirations. And after all, people do live in the communities there. As Natasha's been saying, that these are the spaces in which people live, so they share those experiences of living together.
I'm Mrs. Bousso from Senegal. I'm professor in environmental studies and inspector of secondary education. I wanted to make a contribution on the theme education in society. In Senegal, it's well structured. We've involved the society in the schools, and today it's the locality that manages school, the contributions of the parents and so forth. But the big problem that arises and that I wanted to share with the dear panelists is how to involve all these stakeholders. When you organize a meeting, for example, generally speaking, the parents of the students are absent, and we asked ourselves why. Well, we noted that in most of the schools, it's a standard program which is taught, and we don't take into account the specificity of the locality. And so we visited a program in the US on leadership and education. That's why I encourage summits like these, because it's always important to collaborate and have an exchange of ideas. Where over and beyond the global school program, there's a specific program. So we too tried this in Senegal. We drew out our action plan. Other than the standard program, we now at each school level have a environmental research done concerning the most serious environmental issues of the locality. If it's a school in a coastal region, then we do publication research on climate change and erosion. If it's a question of salt water and need for drinking water and so forth. So we are progressively taking parents now towards the school and to demonstrate why it is important to involve the population. One small example that we experienced in Senegal, it's an NGO that came to a village for burying household waste. There was the funding for purchase of dustbins, but in the village there was another problem which was much more crucial than the waste problem. There was no water in the village. Women had to go kilometers away to find water. Now the project, the NGO came, did work on household water management and equipped each home with big bins, very pretty plastic bins. The following year, when the same project came back to make an assessment, instead of waste in the bins, what they found was water in the bins. So the recipients are not used for storing waste, but for water, because water was the actual biggest problem in the neighborhood. And so the same thing, we have to think about this when we think about our schools, emphasize the priority, local priority. What is the burning issue for the society and the school? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that links to one of the questions that I've had here, actually, which is comments on Natasha's remark earlier that education is not like baking cookies, and is asking for some more examples of things that we can really change. We have lots of these aspirations, but some of those are really very long-term, and some of them, I think, as one of the questioners was alluding to, can be a little bit vague or intangible. So maybe a question to panel is, what are things that we should be taking account of? As our last questioner said, what things might we be able to change? So just very briefly, any thoughts on that? Do you want to follow up your cookie comment?
I'll try. I don't know about Senegal, but in Brazil, often the parents are called in schools or to the teachers to say bad about their kids, or to say, oh, your kid is great, you are great, it's fantastic. So they are not part of the school. So, and many times the schools want the parents to go there at like 2 p.m. People work, they can't be there. So I think that these are examples that I think we have to understand how this community live, and to make the participation process something that happens all the time, not once a year in the party or just for a meeting with the teachers. Participation, bring up the parents into the school, bring the school outside to the public spaces, to the kids' house. It's something that has to happen all the time, so people can feel they are part of the process. I think there are strategies, but the idea is that.
Rod, would you like to comment on?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Natasha was saying, and I think the issue we often view of bringing into the school as opposed to the school going out. So it's really about outreach, and not in a phony way, in a real way, and that's often through the kinds of activities that students are doing. So can there be time and space in the curriculum for project-based learning, if you will, where students are actually doing community development work as part of their learning? That really starts to bring the community and the schools closer together. It has to be meaningful. It has to affect change in the communities. And though the more we can do those kinds of things, the more parents and communities can look into the school and see it. I think it might have been Natasha who said that, certainly in Canada, in British Columbia, we talk about schools are there to prepare students for the real world. Well, schools are the real world, and because that's where kids are living for those 12 or 13 years. And so we have to break down that idea that schools are where you play at living and pretend to live, and then you really live when you get out. We need to have students actually living and breathing in the communities while they're in schools and doing meaningful work in projects, and that's what really helps students stay engaged with their work, stay engaged with schools, stay engaged with their communities, because it's real and meaningful, not pretend.
Thank you. And I think now might be a good point just to bring in a question that I've received here, which is actually about the use of technologies and digital learning. I think that's probably quite a record in WISE. We've managed to have about 80 minutes of debate without talking about technology very much. So the question that I've got here is, how can digital learning facilitate the transition towards employment and acquisition of skills in challenged areas? So I thought perhaps, Abner, perhaps you'd like to start commenting on that.
Well, it's an extremely powerful tool because it's extremely interactive. But when you're in a rural area, for example in Haiti, we don't have the necessary facilities. It's a problem. But there is a demand because we carried out some experiments in order to provide people access with the internet, with IT tools, and we realized that people are very favorable to those attempts. Young people are very interested, but now we have to train the teachers so that they can use the material. We also need to make sure that that material is available. The facilities also need to be available. We need to have access to electricity, because in Haiti, not everyone has access to electricity. You need to have either you can have solar panels, but it means huge investments. But this investment gives you access to information, and we're currently discussing with an institution that is working on a program called digital tools, and it's about training the teachers so that those teachers can work together with the students afterwards, and this will improve the quality of the teaching. And then there is a better involvement, a better understanding. So it's extremely important tool if we want to change things, we want to transform things in education.
Thank you. Would you like to comment as well? Use
Yeah.
digital technologies?
I think technology is very relevant, and especially in what we're doing in Gaza because of the blockade situation and some of the programs that we've initiated, the one I mentioned, which is the virtual majlis, that helps us to connect, with the outside world, connecting our young people to U.S. and to other countries through a digital portal. And we've actually worked also with the private sector who've actually donated to us technology that helps us to connect, and that's how we see as breaking the blockade, is these students have access to education, they have access to certain resources through technology, and the next project that we're working on, as I mentioned earlier, was also this distant employment concept is by which work could be outsourced to young people in Gaza. So technology is very relevant, and it applies to other parts of the world too. And also, what we've seen in many of the remote parts of the world or places that are hit with conflict is usually, for example, mobile technology is very readily accessible in these places. That's one thing that's always there, that mobile phones and things. So this is an opportunity that we need to look into, and it's very relevant.
We work. I'd like to tell you about an experience, because we work. One of our tools is communication, local communication, trying to use all the media assets we have to make local information circulate. And there's one experience which is very nice, which is called Catraca Livre, which is a mapping of all the opportunities that the city of São Paulo have that is for free or low cost that people can access. So everything that the city offers for everybody in cultural, social, in health, and any area that is for free. If you want to find where can I find an aspirin now nearby my house, you can find there. So what we are trying to do is to connect these experiences of database in the city, so we can find the resources we need to development. So that is something very successful. It's thousands of people access this every day, this website, and we have agents all over the city sending information about this low cost and free opportunities. So it's something very powerful we have developed there, and it can be developed anywhere.
My name is Halim Al-Qadi. I work for Himam Qatariya as a coordinator for work-based learning programs here in Qatar. I have a question. I guess I'll direct it towards Mr. Allen, but anyone's free to answer it. You mentioned adding more white space to the education system. I'm just curious as to whether you were successful in this, because a lot of, here in Qatar, for example, a lot of places are building all this standardized, education. They're putting all these, you have to have this, and you're going to be tested on this at the end of the, where do you get for people that are trying to run programs that you feel are very valuable to the education, but they're not sort of in the curriculum, how do you feel that's working for you? Is it accepted by the people that are running the policy, these kinds of things?
Great question. You've got 1 minute.
We have half an hour. I think we've been quite successful. But part of what we're doing is we've identified competencies that go along with the curriculum. And because what you assess is what you think is important. So competencies like students' abilities to communicate, work collaboratively, think critically, think creatively, and social emotional learning, as well as social self-responsibility, are sort of our key competencies, and develop performance standards for students, or learning continua for students to sort of assess their own progress in those competency areas, because we have to demonstrate for parents, and I think also for policymakers, that students are progressing and that they are moving ahead. Otherwise, if you leave a vacuum there, you're going to get standardized testing, which isn't necessarily what any of us would want. But you also have to be able to demonstrate that students are having basic foundational skills, that they can read, that they're numerate, etc. So we work very hard in those early years to be able to demonstrate that. We currently in British Columbia have a provincial assessment around reading, writing, and numeracy at around the grade 4 level. We think those are going to be revamped in a year or two, and just starting conversations about that. But that probably won't go away much. So we're going to have to be able to identify that kids have basic competencies, but also at the same time start to find ways to, and I'm going to use the word assess, and that's not quite right, to be able to demonstrate, for students to be able to demonstrate to themselves and to others their progress in these competency areas. And so far that seems to be working pretty well. People are liking that a lot. In communities that have done that have been sort of working on a bit of a pilot basis, parents and students have really progressed well under that kind of a model, and getting away from sort of standard reporting kinds of processes into ones that really demonstrate a lot of knowledge about where kids are at, what they need to do to get better at those competency areas as well as at the content areas.
Thank you. And I'm afraid we've run out of time, so I just want to say a very, very big thank you to all the panellists for their inspiration here this afternoon. I hope that you've been able to take away lots of ideas from the projects that they've been describing and analysing. Mainly, I think some of the key ideas are around kind of listening to the people that you're working with, the beneficiaries, knowing your context, taking time to plan. But please do continue the conversations. I know there are a lot of people who had their hands up who we didn't get a chance to hear from, so please send them, put them on the Twitter or on the community page, or do continue the conversations with the panellists. Thank you very much.